The morning sun cast long shadows across the pristine grounds of Westfield Academy, an elite equestrian school nestled in the rolling hills of Virginia's horse country. Mercedes-Benz sedans and Range Rovers lined the circular driveway, their polished chrome reflecting the manicured lawns and ivy-covered buildings that screamed old money and tradition. This was where America's wealthy sent their children to learn the refined art of English riding, dressage, and show jumping, a world where bloodlines mattered as much for the riders as they did for their horses. Into this realm of privilege stepped Savannah Mae Whitaker, her worn cowboy boots clicking against the marble floors of the main hall. At 19, she carried herself with the easy confidence that came from a lifetime spent working alongside horses. But here, surrounded by students in pristine riding habits and gleaming leather boots that cost more than her family's monthly grocery bill, she felt the weight of being different. "Well, would you look at what the wind done blew in?" came a voice dripping with manufactured sweetness. Savannah turned to see a tall, perfectly coiffed blonde approaching, flanked by two equally polished companions. The speaker was Madison Covington Smith, heir to a pharmaceutical fortune and three-time regional dressage champion. Her riding jacket bore the subtle but unmistakable marks of custom tailoring, and her boots were so pristine they might never have seen a stable. "Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." Savannah straightened her shoulders, her Texas drawl emerging clear and unashamed. "Name's Savannah Whitaker. I reckon I'm in the right place for the transfer student orientation?" The trio of girls exchanged glances, barely suppressed laughter dancing in their eyes. Madison's voice took on an exaggerated southern accent, each word dripping with mockery. "Oh, my stars and garters, y'all. We got ourselves a genuine cowgirl. Tell me, Savannah Mae," she drew out the name like it tasted bitter, "did you ride your horse all the way from Texas, or did you take the stagecoach?" The other students had begun to gather, drawn by the commotion. Whispers rippled through the crowd as more phones appeared, capturing what they clearly viewed as entertainment. Savannah felt heat rise in her cheeks, but her expression remained steady. She'd faced down charging bulls and ornery broncos. She wouldn't be intimidated by a bunch of privileged teenagers with trust funds. "Well, actually, I flew," Savannah replied evenly, though her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Same as most folks do these days, I imagine." This earned another round of giggles from Madison's entourage. "Oh, honey, I just love how authentic you are. It's so rustic, very pioneer woman meets reality TV. I bet you'll just love our Western riding elective, though I suppose for you, that's just called riding, isn't it?" The crowd had grown larger, and Savannah could feel dozens of eyes on her, watching, judging, waiting to see if she would crack under the pressure. Some students held their phones openly, recording what they clearly viewed as a viral moment. The whispers grew louder, a mixture of cruel amusement and second-hand embarrassment. "Look at those boots," someone whispered, not quite quietly enough. "Are those actually from a thrift store?" "I heard her scholarship covers everything because her family raises cattle, like actual farm work." Madison's smile grew wider, sensing blood in the water. "You know what, Savannah Mae? I think you and I are going to be great friends. In fact, why don't you join us for lunch? We're having sushi from that new place in town, though I suppose you're more of a barbecue girl." The laughter that followed was sharp and cutting, echoing off the marble walls of the hallway. Savannah felt something cold settle in her stomach, a familiar feeling from her childhood when she'd been the scholarship kid at her local school, the one whose clothes came from discount stores while her classmates wore designer labels. But this time was different. This time, she wasn't a powerless child. This time, she had skills that these silver spoon students couldn't even imagine. "Well, much obliged for the invite," Savannah said, her voice steady despite the storm brewing behind her green eyes. "But I reckon I'll find my own way around. Wouldn't want to impose on y'all's delicate sensibilities with my rustic charm." The words hung in the air, carrying just enough edge to make Madison's smile falter for a split second. There was something in the way Savannah carried herself, a quiet strength that suggested she was far from beaten. The crowd sensed it too, the dynamic shifting subtly as they realized this wasn't going to be the easy takedown they'd expected. "We'll see about that, sugar," Madison replied, her voice losing some of its theatrical quality and gaining a harder edge. "Welcome to Westfield Academy. I do hope you'll find your time here educational." As the crowd began to disperse, chattering excitedly about the morning's entertainment, Savannah stood alone in the marble hallway, her reflection multiplied in the polished surfaces around her. She looked out of place, certainly. Her simple jeans and button-down shirt, a stark contrast to the designer casual wear surrounding her. But there was something in her posture that spoke of unshakable foundations. She thought of her grandfather's words, spoken the night before she left Texas. "Savannah Mae, there's gonna be folks who try to make you feel small because of where you come from. But remember, a horse doesn't care if its rider wears diamonds or denim. It only cares if they can stay in the saddle." Little did Madison Covington Smith and her privileged friends know that they had just awakened something dangerous. They had laughed at her accent, mocked her clothes, and dismissed her background. But in 3 days, when the interdepartmental riding competition began, they would learn exactly what kind of rider had just walked into their pristine world. And it would leave them absolutely speechless. The next morning arrived with the crisp clarity that only comes with autumn in Virginia horse country. Savannah had spent a restless night in her small dormitory room, the sounds of her roommate's expensive sound machine doing little to drown out the echo of yesterday's humiliation. As she dressed in her simple riding clothes, clean but clearly well worn, she could hear the excited chatter from down the hall where Madison and her friends were preparing for their morning ride. "Did you see her face yesterday?" Madison's voice carried clearly through the thin walls. "I thought she was going to cry right there in the hallway. These scholarship kids never last long once they realize what they're up against." Savannah's jaw tightened as she pulled on her boots, the same ones that had drawn such derision the day before. They were scuffed and worn, true enough, but they had carried her through countless hours in the saddle, across Texas plains and through rodeo arenas from Houston to Fort Worth. Every scrape and mark told a story of real riding, not the sanitized version practiced in climate-controlled indoor arenas. The dining hall buzzed with the usual morning energy as students fuel up before classes. Savannah took her place in line, acutely aware of the whispers that followed her movement. The cafeteria workers, at least, seemed genuinely kind. Mrs. Rodriguez behind the counter had given her an extra helping of eggs with a warm smile that reminded her of home. She was halfway through her breakfast when Madison's voice cut through the ambient noise like a blade. "Well, if it isn't our little cowgirl," Madison approached with her usual entourage, their riding clothes immaculate and clearly expensive. "How was your first night in civilization, honey? Did the indoor plumbing confuse you?" The nearby tables fell silent, sensing drama brewing. Phones appeared with practiced subtlety, this generation's version of gathering around a schoolyard fight. Savannah continued eating, not giving them the satisfaction of a reaction. "Oh, she's giving us the silent treatment," laughed Brittany Ashworth, Madison's second-in-command, whose father owned a string of championship racehorses. "Maybe she doesn't understand us unless we speak in, what do they call it, yee-haw?" The laughter that followed was sharp and cruel, but Savannah had faced worse. She finished her eggs, took a long sip of her coffee, and finally looked up at the trio standing beside her table. "Mornin', ladies," she said pleasantly, her accent deliberately thicker than usual. "Y'all sleep well in your fancy beds? I sure did appreciate the thread count on those sheets. Must be at least 150. Madison's eyes narrowed. The comment was clearly meant to mock their privilege, but it was delivered with such apparent sincerity that she couldn't quite grasp the offense to react to it properly. "Oh, how quaint," Madison finally managed. "I suppose when you're used to sleeping on hay bales, anything feels luxurious." "Oh, I never slept on hay bales. That's horse feed, not bedding. Though I reckon someone who's never actually worked in a barn might not know the difference." A few students at nearby tables snickered, and Madison's cheeks flushed pink. She was unaccustomed to anyone challenging her, even indirectly. "You know what, Savannah Mae?" Madison's voice took on a dangerous edge. "I think it's time someone taught you where you stand in the pecking order around here. Are you familiar with our little interdepartmental competition coming up this weekend?" Savannah had heard about it, of course. Every student was required to participate in some capacity. It was one of Westfield Academy's oldest traditions, designed to showcase the various riding disciplines taught at the school. English riders competed in dressage and show jumping, while the smaller Western program had events like reining and trail obstacles. "I've heard tell of it," Savannah replied carefully. Madison's smile was sharp as a razor. "Wonderful. Here's what's going to happen, sugar. You're going to enter the advanced individual competition. Not the beginner Western stuff, but the real riding. English saddle, proper form, the works. And when you embarrass yourself in front of the entire school, maybe you'll understand that this isn't some dusty county fair where your little cowgirl tricks actually mean something." The challenge hung in the air like smoke. Every eye in the vicinity was on them now, the moment crackling with tension. Madison had just publicly challenged Savannah to compete in disciplines she'd presumably never trained in, using equipment and techniques foreign to Western riding. It was designed to be humiliating, a very public way of putting the scholarship student in her place. Savannah was quiet for a long moment, considering. The smart play would be to decline, to stick to the Western events where she belonged according to their rigid hierarchy. But something in Madison's smug expression, something in the cruel laughter of her followers, something in the expectant faces of the crowd waiting to see her back down, sparked a fire that had been building since yesterday's confrontation. "Well now," she said slowly, rising from her chair with fluid grace, "that's mighty generous of you to suggest. I was fixin' to compete in the Western events, but if you think I ought to try something new, I reckon I'll take you up on that challenge." A collective intake of breath swept through the dining hall. Madison's eyes widened slightly. She'd expected refusal, not acceptance. "All of it?" Madison pressed, wanting to make sure the trap was fully set. "Dressage, stadium jumping, cross-country, the full advanced individual eventing competition?" "Every last bit," Savannah confirmed, her voice steady as steel. "Though I got to wonder, will you be competing too? Or are you just the kind of issue challenges you ain't willing to face yourself?" Now it was Madison's turn to feel the pressure. The crowd was watching, phones were recording, and her reputation as the school's top rider was suddenly on the line. "Of course I'll be competing," Madison snapped. "I've won the individual competition 2 years in a row." "Well then," Savannah extended her hand with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, "may the best rider win." As Madison reluctantly shook her hand, neither of them could know that this moment would be replayed thousands of times across social media in the coming days. But more importantly, neither of them could predict what would happen when Savannah Whitaker finally had the chance to show these privileged riders what real horsemanship looked like. The gauntlet had been thrown down. In 4 days, everything would change. The Westfield Academy stables were a marvel of modern equestrian architecture, a far cry from the simple barn where Savannah had learned to ride back in Texas. Climate-controlled with pristine concrete aisles, automatic waterers, and stalls large enough for small apartments, it housed some of the finest horses money could buy. Each stall bore a brass nameplate with the horse's registered name and competition record, many listing victories at prestigious shows across the country. Savannah walked slowly down the main aisle, her boots echoing in the vast space. The contrast between this sterile perfection and her grandfather's weathered barn was stark. Here, there were no cats lounging in hay bales, no chickens pecking around the feed room, no worn leather tack that served 3 generations of riders. Everything gleamed with the kind of perfection that only existed when money was no object. Impressive, isn't it? The voice belonged to James McCarthy, the head instructor for the Western program, and one of the few faculty members who hadn't looked at Savannah with either pity or dismissal. A man in his 50s with silver hair and hands scarred from decades of working with horses. He had the weathered look of someone who'd earned his knowledge the hard way. "It surely is," Savannah replied, running her hand along a stall door where a magnificent bay warmblood watched her with intelligent eyes. "Though, I gotta say, it feels more like a hospital than a barn." James chuckled. "You're not wrong. Sometimes I wonder if these kids remember they're working with living beings instead of expensive equipment." He paused beside her, studying her profile. "Word round campus is you've stirred up quite the hornet's nest." "Didn't mean to cause trouble," Savannah said, though her tone suggested she wasn't entirely sorry about it. "Just seems some folks around here mistake money for skill." "And you think you can prove otherwise?" There was no challenge in his voice, just genuine curiosity. Savannah turned to face him directly. "Mr. McCarthy, I've been riding since before I could walk proper. Not in fancy arenas with perfect footing and controlled conditions, but out in the real world, where horses are partners, not accessories. These students may have had every advantage money can buy, but have they ever had to stay on a horse that's genuinely trying to throw them? Have they ever had to gentle a rescue that's been mistreated? Have they ever ridden bareback across open country just because it needed doing?" The passion in her voice caught his attention. James had been teaching long enough to recognize the difference between confidence and arrogance, and what he heard from Savannah was pure, unshakable certainty. "The thing is," he said carefully, "Madison Covington Smith isn't just talk. She's genuinely talented. 3-time state champion in dressage, 2-time regional winner in eventing. Her horse Prometheus is worth more than most people's houses, and they've been training together since she was 12. You're talking about beating her at her own game, using equipment and techniques you've never trained with." Savannah nodded thoughtfully. "What horse will they give me to ride?" James winced slightly. "That's complicated. The school horses are good, don't get me wrong, but they're used for lessons, basic training level at best. Madison will be riding her own horse, a Dutch warmblood with bloodlines going back to the finest European sport horses. It's not exactly a fair fight." They had reached the end of the aisle, where the school horses were housed in a separate wing. These were still beautiful animals. This was Westfield Academy, after all. But there was a clear difference in quality and conditioning. These were honest, reliable horses meant to teach the basics, not to compete at advanced levels. "Tell me about this one," Savannah said, stopping in front of a stall housing a chestnut gelding with a white blaze down his face. Unlike the pampered warmbloods in the main barn, this horse had the look of a working animal, solid, sensible, and unadorned. "That's Rusty," James replied. "Quarter horse cross, maybe 15 years old. He's been here longer than I have. Good mind, steady as a rock, but he's never been trained above basic level in any of the English disciplines. He'd be hopeless in a dressage test." Savannah opened the stall door and stepped inside, her movements slow and deliberate. Rusty lifted his head from his hay net, ears pricked forward with interest rather than alarm. She extended her hand, letting him catch her scent, and began speaking in low, soothing tones. "Hey there, old man. You look like you've got some stories to tell." What happened next surprised even James. Instead of the polite but indifferent acceptance most horses showed strangers, Rusty stepped forward and lowered his head, pressing his forehead against Savannah's chest in a gesture of immediate trust and connection. "Well, I'll be damned," James muttered. "He's never done that with anyone before." Savannah's hands found the sweet spots behind Rusty's ears, and the horse's eyes half closed in pleasure. "He's got good bone, nice balance," she murmured, running her hands over his neck and shoulders with the practiced assessment of someone who'd evaluated hundreds of horses. "Strong hindquarters, good feet. He's been well cared for, but he's bored. Look at his eyes. There's intelligence there that ain't being challenged." "Savannah," James said quietly, "you can't seriously be thinking of taking on Madison Covington Smith riding Rusty. The skill difference is one thing, but the horse difference. It would be like bringing a pickup truck to a Formula One race." Savannah continued her examination, lifting Rusty's feet to check his hooves, running her hands down his legs to assess his soundness. The horse stood perfectly still, as if he understood the importance of this evaluation. "Mr. McCarthy, you ever hear the story about Seabay Scott?" "Of course. Small, ungainly horse that nobody thought much of until he started beating the finest thoroughbreds in the country. Sometimes it ain't about breeding or bloodlines or how much money got spent. Sometimes it's about heart and partnership and wanting it more than the other fellow." She gave Rusty one final pat and stepped out of the stall, but the horse followed her to the door, clearly not wanting her to leave. "Besides," she added with a smile that held just a hint of steel, "I got a feeling old Rusty here has been waiting his whole life to show these fancy horses what real riding looks like. Haven't you, boy?" Rusty nickered softly in response, and James felt a chill run down his spine. Maybe, just maybe, Madison Covington Smith is about to learn that there's more than one way to ride a horse. The competition was still 3 days away, but battle lines were being drawn in ways that no one had anticipated. The clock on the stable wall read 5:47 a.m. when Savannah slipped through the side door, moving like a ghost through the pre-dawn darkness. She'd been making this journey for 3 mornings straight, rising before the sun to work with Rusty while the rest of the academy slept. It was the only way to get the training time she needed without enduring the constant scrutiny and mockery that followed her during regular hours. Rusty nickered softly when he saw her approaching, his intelligent eyes bright despite the early hour. In just 3 days, they'd formed a bond that surprised even Savannah. She'd worked with hundreds of horses in her life, but there was something special about this partnership, a mutual understanding that transcended the usual rider-horse relationship. "Morning, handsome," she whispered, slipping into his stall with a handful of apple slices. "Ready to show these folks what we're made of?" She'd spent hours the previous evening studying videos of advanced dressage and show jumping on her laptop, analyzing the precise movements and techniques that would be expected in the competition. It was like learning a new language, one spoken in half-halts and flying changes, in collection and extension, in precise geometry and athletic precision. The English saddle felt foreign beneath her as she led Rusty into the indoor arena, its deeper seat and longer stirrups a stark contrast to the Western saddle that had been like a second skin for most of her life. But horses were horses, and riding was riding, even if the style and equipment were different. "All right, boy, let's see what you remember from your younger days," she murmured, settling into the saddle and gathering her reins. What she discovered over the next hour amazed her. Beneath Rusty's steady, reliable exterior lay a horse who had clearly received classical training years ago. His gaits were naturally balanced, his mouth soft and responsive to subtle rein aids. When she asked for a leg yield, he responded immediately, crossing his legs with textbook precision. A request for shoulder in revealed muscle memory that had been dormant but not forgotten. "You old fraud," she laughed, patting his neck as he executed a perfect 20-meter circle at collected trot. "You've been pretending to be a simple lesson horse all these years, haven't you?" The transformation was remarkable. Away from the chaos of regular lessons, with a rider who understood how to ask properly, Rusty began to bloom. His neck arched naturally as he found his balance. His steps became lighter and more expressive, his entire demeanor shifting from resigned schoolmaster to willing athlete. By the time the sun crested the horizon, painting the indoor arena in golden light, they had established the basics of all 3 phases of the competition. Dressage would be their strongest phase. Rusty's natural balance and Savannah's instinctive seat made for surprisingly harmonious movement. Show jumping would be more challenging, requiring precise timing and technique, but Rusty's honest nature meant he would try his heart out over every fence. Cross-country would be the wild card, a test of bravery and partnership across natural obstacles at speed. "Looking good out there," came a voice from the arena entrance. Savannah turned to see James McCarthy leaning against the rail, a steaming cup of coffee in his hands, and an expression of amazement on his weathered face. "Mr. McCarthy, I didn't hear you come in," Savannah said, bringing Rusty to a halt near the rail. "Been watching for about 20 minutes. That horse hasn't moved like that since before I came to work here. Where'd you learn to sit a horse like that?" Savannah patted Rusty's neck, feeling the slight dampness of honest work beneath her palm. "My granddaddy always said that good horsemanship don't change just because you switch disciplines. A balanced seat is a balanced seat, whether you're cutting cattle or doing dressage. The partnership is what matters." James sipped his coffee thoughtfully. "You know, I looked up Rusty's history last night. He came to us from a dressage barn that went out of business about 10 years ago. Trained through 4th level before he ended up here. No wonder he's responding so well to proper riding." 4th level? Savannah's eyes widened. In dressage terms, that was serious training, well beyond what most riders ever achieved. "The thing is," James continued, "nobody here ever bothered to find out what he could do. They just saw a steady old horse and used him for beginner lessons. Sometimes I think we get so caught up in breeding and bloodlines that we forget to look at what's actually in front of us." They were interrupted by the sound of voices and approaching footsteps. Madison's distinctive laugh echoed through the stable as she arrived with her usual entourage for their morning training session. "Quick," James said quietly, "take them out the back entrance. You don't need them seeing what you two are capable of, not yet." But it was too late. Madison appeared in the arena doorway, immaculate in her custom riding clothes, followed by Brittany and 2 other girls whose names Savannah hadn't bothered to learn. Their chatter died as they took in the scene, Savannah on Rusty, both horse and rider clearly having just finished serious work.
"Well, well," Madison drawled, her voice carrying that familiar edge of cruelty. "What do we have here? Playing dress-up and English tack, are we? How adorable." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Savannah felt Rusty tense beneath her, picking up on the sudden shift in atmosphere. She kept her hands steady and her voice calm. "Just getting some practice in, same as anyone." "Practice," Brittany laughed. "Honey, you can put lipstick on a pig, but it's still a pig. That old hack couldn't do a proper dressage test if his life depended on it." The insult to Rusty hit Savannah harder than any personal attack could have. Her jaw tightened, and she felt the familiar fire building in her chest. But before she could respond, something unexpected happened. James McCarthy stepped forward, his voice carrying quiet authority. "Ladies, I suggest you focus on your own preparation. The competition is only 2 days away, and from what I just witnessed, you might want to spend that time wisely." Madison's eyes narrowed. "Excuse me? Are you suggesting that—" She gestured dismissively at Savannah and Rusty. "This is somehow a threat to actual trained riders?" "I'm suggesting," James replied evenly, "that underestimating your competition is rarely a winning strategy. Now, if you'll excuse us, some of us have work to do." The tension in the arena was thick enough to cut with a knife. Madison's face flushed with anger at being dismissed, but James's reputation as a former Olympic coach carried weight even among the English riders. She wasn't about to engage in a public argument with him. "Come on, girls," Madison said finally, her voice dripping with disdain. "Let's go work with horses that actually know what they're doing." As the group swept out of the arena, their expensive boots clicking on the concrete aisle, James turned back to Savannah with an expression of grim determination. "You've got 2 more days," he said quietly. "Make them count, because after what just happened, Madison is going to be gunning for you even harder than before."
Savannah nodded, gathering her reins and asking Rusty to move forward into a working trot. 2 days to prepare for the biggest riding challenge of her life. 2 days to prove that heart and skill mattered more than money and privilege. 2 days to show them all what a real cowgirl could do. As she and Rusty moved into their training routine, neither of them noticed the figure watching from the shadows of the stable office. Someone who had been filming their entire conversation on their phone, already composing the social media post that would make this competition far more public than anyone had anticipated. The stakes had just gotten significantly higher. The evening before the competition arrived with an unseasonable chill that seemed to seep into every corner of the academy. Savannah sat on her narrow dormitory bed, her laptop open to a video analysis of Madison's past performances, when her roommate Jessica finally spoke up from across the small room. "You know," Jessica said quietly, looking up from her own laptop, "everyone thinks you're completely insane." Savannah paused the video of Madison executing a flawless extended trot. "That's so?" "The betting pool has you lasting maybe 10 minutes before you fall off," Jessica continued, her voice matter-of-fact rather than cruel. "Madison's offering 20-to-1 odds that you don't complete the dressage test." "Mighty generous of her," Savannah replied, closing the laptop and leaning back against her pillow. Jessica was one of the few students who hadn't actively participated in the mockery, though she'd never actively defended Savannah either. Her silence had been a form of self-preservation that Savannah understood, even if she didn't respect it. "Why are you doing this? You could have just competed in the Western events, won those easily, and proven your point. Why risk total humiliation in disciplines you've never trained in?" Savannah was quiet for a long moment, staring at the ceiling where someone had stuck glow-in-the-dark stars in a pattern that bore no resemblance to any actual constellation. "You ever been made to feel small, Jessica? Not just criticized or corrected, but made to feel like you're less than human because of where you come from?" Not really, no. My whole life, I've been the scholarship kid, the charity case, the one who doesn't belong. Back home, I was too poor for the rich kids and too studious for the ranch hands' children. I never quite fit anywhere. She turned to look at her roommate directly. "But the one place I always belonged was on horseback. The one thing nobody could take away from me was my ability to ride." Jessica shifted uncomfortably, perhaps recognizing her own complicity in the Academy's culture of exclusion. "These people," she continued, "they think their money makes them better riders. They think their fancy equipment and expensive horses mean they understand partnership with an animal. But they don't. They've never had to gentle a rescue horse that's been beaten. They've never had to stay on a bronc that's genuinely trying to hurt them. They've never had to build trust from nothing but patience and skill." "But Madison really is good," Jessica said softly. "She's not just rich, she has genuine talent." "I don't doubt it," Savannah agreed, "but talent without humility is just arrogance waiting to fall. And tomorrow, I'm going to show everyone what real horsemanship looks like." Down the hall, the sound of laughter and music indicated that Madison's crowd was having a pre-competition party, complete with champagne their parents had sent over for the occasion. The contrast couldn't have been more stark. While they celebrated their anticipated victory, Savannah sat in the dim light of her dorm room, preparing for what many saw as her inevitable defeat. Her phone buzzed with a text from her grandfather back in Texas. "Remember, Savannah Mae, it ain't the size of the horse in the fight, it's the size of the fight in the horse. You and Rusty got something they can't buy. Trust it." At the same time, her laptop chimed with an email notification. The sender was anonymous. The subject line simply read, "You should see this." Inside was a link to a social media post that made her blood run cold. It was a video of her training session with Rusty from 3 days ago, but edited to make them both look incompetent. The caption read, "Country bumpkin thinks she can compete with real riders. This is going to be painful to watch. Hashtag Westfield Academy Rodeo fail. Hashtag cowgirl delusional." The video had already been shared hundreds of times with comments ranging from cruel laughter to genuine concern for her safety. Someone had leaked her story beyond the academy walls, turning what should have been a private competition into a very public spectacle. Her hands shook as she scrolled through the comments. Is this real? Someone should stop her before she gets hurt. Privilege versus actual skill. Can't wait to see how this plays out. That poor horse. Ryder has no idea what she's doing. Plot twist, country girl actually knows what she's doing and destroys these rich kids. The video had caught the attention of equestrian social media influencers, riding blogs, and even some mainstream sports outlets. What should have been a simple school competition had become a viral phenomenon, with thousands of people now invested in the outcome. Savannah closed the laptop and walked to her window, looking out over the pristine academy grounds. In the distance, she could see the lights of the stable, where Rusty was spending his last quiet night before the storm. Tomorrow, they would face not just Madison and her cronies, but the judgment of thousands of strangers who had already decided she was in over her head. The smart thing would be to withdraw, to claim injury or illness and void the very public humiliation that seemed inevitable. Her phone was buzzing constantly now with notifications as the video continued to spread, each share adding to the mountain of expectations and mockery she would face tomorrow. But as she stood there in the darkness, she thought about every time someone had counted her out, every time someone had assumed she couldn't achieve something because of her background or her accent or her lack of money. She thought about every girl who had ever been made to feel less than because she didn't fit someone else's definition of worthy. And she thought about Rusty, waiting in his stall, probably sensing that tomorrow would be different. He deserved a rider who wouldn't quit when things got difficult. She picked up her phone and typed a single message on her own social media account. See y'all tomorrow. Within minutes, it had dozens of likes and comments of support from people back home in Texas, fellow rodeo competitors, and strangers who were rooting for the underdog. The virtual crowd was split, but at least some people believed in her. As she settled into bed, Savannah could hear Madison's party still going strong down the hall. Let them celebrate, she thought. Tomorrow, when the dust settled and the scores were tallied, they would all learn that there was more than one way to ride a horse. And sometimes, the cowgirl wins. The morning of the competition dawned crisp and clear, with autumn sunlight streaming through the windows of the Academy's main arena. By 7 a.m., the grounds were buzzing with activity, as students, faculty, parents, and, thanks to the viral video, reporters and social media influencers descended on Westfield Academy for what had become the most watched scholastic equestrian event in recent memory. Savannah arrived at the stable to find a small crowd already gathered around Rusty's stall, their phones out and cameras rolling. The sight of strangers treating her horse like a zoo exhibit made her jaw clench, but she pushed through the crowd without comment, her focus entirely on her partner for the day. Easy boy, she murmured, slipping into Rusty's stall as the crowd pressed closer to the bars. Just you and me today, same as always. But it wasn't the same as always, and they both knew it. The atmosphere was electric with anticipation and judgment, the air thick with whispered conversations and barely contained excitement. Through the stable windows, she could see the warm-up arena filling with competitors and their expensive horses, their movements precise and practiced as they prepared for the day's events. James McCarthy appeared at her elbow, his face grim. Media circus out there. 3 news crews, half a dozen riding bloggers, and about 200 spectators. This is unprecedented for a school competition. Any word on the order of go? Savannah asked, her hands steady as she ran the body brush over Rusty's coat. Madison goes last, of course. She requested it, probably wants to see what everyone else does first. The psychological warfare was subtle but effective. Going last meant Madison could adjust her strategy based on the scores that came before her, while going third meant Savannah would be riding with no knowledge of what she needed to beat. An hour later, dressed in borrowed formal attire that didn't quite fit, the coat too long in the arms, the boots a half size too big, Savannah led Rusty toward the warm-up arena. The crowds parted before them, phones capturing every step, every expression, every moment of what many expected to be a spectacular failure. The warm-up arena was a study of controlled chaos. Horses and riders moved in careful patterns, each pair focused on their final preparations. The contrast was stark. Sleek, warm bloods worth six figures moving with the fluid grace of professional athletes, while Rusty looked like exactly what he was, an honest, sturdy quarter-horse cross who belonged in a lesson program. "Oh my God, is that really her horse?" The whisper came from a cluster of parents near the rail, their voices carrying despite their attempts at discretion. "Someone should stop this before she gets hurt," another voice added. "The liability alone." Savannah blocked out the noise and focused on Rusty, asking him to move into our warm-up routine. Immediately, she felt the familiar transformation as her partner responded to her aids. His neck arched, his back lifted, his gaits became more expressive and athletic. They weren't a perfect match for the other horses in terms of breeding or conformation, but there was something undefinable in their partnership that made even the skeptics take notice. "Ladies and gentlemen, our third competitor is Savannah Whitaker riding Dusty Roads," came the announcer's voice over the loudspeaker. Even he got Rusty's name wrong, a small indignity that somehow felt representative of how she'd been treated since arriving at the academy. "It's Rusty," she corrected quietly, patting her horse's neck. "But they'll remember your real name when we're done." The dressage arena was a rectangle of pristine footing marked with white letters around the perimeter. A, K, E, H, C, M, B, F. Each one representing a precise point where specific movements had to be executed. It was like a dance floor where every step had been choreographed, every moment planned in practice to perfection. As they entered at A and halted at X for their opening salute, Savannah felt a moment of perfect stillness. The crowd, the cameras, the pressure, all of it faded away until there was only her and Rusty and the test that they were about to perform. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s, with decades of experience evaluating horses and riders, nodded almost imperceptibly. The test could begin. What happened next surprised everyone, including Savannah herself. Rusty seemed to sense the importance of the moment, and he rose to meet it. Their first movement, a medium trot down the center line, was balanced and rhythmic. The turn at C flowed smoothly into a working trot, and suddenly they were in the zone where horse and rider become one entity. The shoulder in along the long side was textbook perfect, Rusty's inside legs crossing with precision while maintaining perfect bend and balance. The leg yield from the quarter line to the rail demonstrated simplicity and obedience that had the judge sitting up straighter in her chair. But it was the canter work that truly amazed the crowd. Rusty's transitions were smooth as silk, his leads clean and correct. The simple changes through trot were executed with such harmony that it looked effortless, and his counter-canter showed a level of balance and collection that nobody had expected from a lesson horse. In the stands, the whispers had changed tone entirely. "Where did that horse come from? Look at her position. She's not even moving in the saddle. That's not beginner riding. That's classical horsemanship." Madison, watching from the warm-up arena, felt something cold settle in her stomach. This wasn't the disaster she anticipated. This was good. Really good. As Savannah and Rusty completed their final center line and halted at X for their closing salute, the arena erupted in surprised applause. The judge was scribbling notes furiously, her expression unreadable but intense. When the score came over the loudspeaker, 68.5%, a collective gasp rose from the crowd. It wasn't perfect, but it was more than respectable for this level of competition. More importantly, it was a score that suddenly made the remaining phases very interesting. As Savannah rode out of the arena, patting her Rusty's neck and whispering her thanks, she caught sight of Madison's face in the crowd. The confident smirk was gone, replaced with something that looked remarkably like concern. The cowgirl from Texas had just fired the first shot in a battle that was far from over, and for the first time since arriving at Westfield Academy, she was winning. The 2-hour break between dressage and show jumping felt both endless and instantaneous. Savannah had untacked Rusty and let him graze in a small paddock behind the stables, trying to keep him relaxed while her own nerves began to fray. The dressage score of 68.5% had put them in third place, a respectable position that nobody had expected, but still trailing behind Madison's 74.2% and Brittany's 71.8%. The atmosphere around the stable had shifted noticeably. Where before she'd been met with open mockery or dismissive pity, now there were curious glances and whispered conversations. A few younger students had even approached her with shy requests for autographs, treating her like something between a curiosity and a folk hero. "Miss Whitaker?" A reporter from a local news station appeared at her elbow, microphone in hand and camera crew in tow. "Could we get a quick interview about your unexpected performance in dressage?" "I appreciate the interest," Savannah replied politely, "but I need to focus on my horse right now. Maybe after the competition." The reporter persisted, following her as she moved toward Rusty's paddock. The social media response has been incredible. #CowgirlRising is trending nationally. How does it feel to be representing working-class riders everywhere? Savannah stopped walking and turned to face the camera, her expression serious. "I'm not representing anyone but myself and my horse. This isn't about class warfare or making statements. It's about horsemanship, pure and simple. And right now, I need to prepare for the next phase." What she didn't say, what she couldn't say, was that the show-jumping phase terrified her more than anything she'd ever faced. Dressage was about harmony and precision, qualities that translated well from her Western background. But show jumping was about split-second timing, technical perfection, and the kind of forward riding that was completely foreign to her experience. James appeared at her side as the camera crew reluctantly moved on to find other stories. "How are you holding up?" "Honestly, scared out of my wits," Savannah admitted. "Dressage I could feel my way through, but jumping..." She shook her head. "I've popped Rusty over a few cross rails in our training sessions, but nothing like what they've got set up in there." Through the stable windows, they could see the show-jumping arena being prepared. The course was a technical challenge even for experienced riders. 12 fences ranging from 3'6" to 4 feet in height, with combinations, related distances, and turns that would test both horse and rider to their limits. The oxers were wide and imposing, the verticals decorated with flowers and fillers designed to catch a horse's eye and potentially spook them. "The thing is," James said quietly, "Rusty knows how to jump. I've seen his old records. He was trained through preliminary level eventing before he came here. The knowledge is there, buried under years of easy lessons in simple exercises. But will he remember when it counts? That's up to you to find out. But Savannah, I want you to remember something. You've got instincts that these other riders have never had to develop. You've stayed on horses that were actively trying to hurt you. You've ridden through situations where a mistake meant real danger, not just a ribbon or a trophy. Trust those instincts." An hour later, Savannah found herself back in the warm-up arena, this time with jump standards and poles scattered around the space. The other competitors were already schooling over practice fences, their movements confident and practiced. Madison's mount, Prometheus, floated over a 4-foot oxer like it was a ground pole, landing softly and immediately organizing himself for the next fence. Rusty, meanwhile, looked at the 2'6" cross rail in front of him like it might bite him. "Come on, boy," Savannah encouraged, settling deeper into her saddle and closing her legs around his barrel. "We've done this before. Let's just take it nice and easy." Their first attempt was awkward. Rusty approached hesitantly, took off too early, and landed hard, jarring them both. Savannah's position, so secure in dressage, felt precarious and unbalanced over fences. This was a different kind of riding entirely, requiring her to follow the horse's motion while staying out of his way, a delicate balance she hadn't yet mastered. "Try again," James called from the rail. "More leg, less hand. Let him figure out his job." Their second attempt was better. Rusty found a more confident rhythm, took off at a reasonable distance, and cleared the fence with room to spare. But she could feel the difference between their partnership over fences and their harmony on the flat. This was uncharted territory for both of them. By the time the warm-up period ended, they had established a basic understanding, but it was nothing like the polished performances of the other competitors. As they waited for their turn to enter the show jumping arena, I could hear the scores being announced for the riders ahead of them. The first competitor had a clean round, but with time penalties. The second knocked down 2 rails. Madison, going just before Savannah, entered the arena with the kind of confidence that came from years of winning. What followed was a masterclass in show jumping. Madison and Prometheus moved around the course like they were performing a choreographed dance. Each fence met at the perfect distance, each turn executed with precision. They finished clear within the time allowed, their score maintaining their lead in the overall competition. Next to jump, Savannah Whitaker riding Dusty Roads, came the announcement. And once again, they got Rusty's name wrong. As they entered the arena, Savannah felt the weight of thousands of eyes upon them. The crowd had grown throughout the day, drawn by social media coverage and word of mouth about the underdog story unfolding at Westfield Academy. I could see phones recording their every move, capturing what many still expected to be a catastrophic failure. The starting bell rang, and they were committed.
Their approach to the first fence, a simple vertical decorated with yellow flowers, felt like it took forever. Rusty's ears were pricked forward, his attention focused on the obstacle ahead. At the last moment, he found his distance and launched himself upward, clearing the rails with surprising grace. The crowd's reaction was immediate and electric. Where they had expected disaster, they were witnessing something remarkable. Not polished perfection, but raw determination and authentic partnership. Fence 2 was an oxer, wide and imposing. Rusty hesitated for a stride, unsure of the spread, but Savannah's legs urged him forward, and he responded with a mighty leap that carried them well clear of the back rail. By fence 4, something magical was happening. Rusty was remembering his training, his confidence building with each successful effort. His ears stayed forward, his stride became more rhythmic, and Savannah found herself beginning to trust the process. The combination at 7 and 8 tested them severely. The distance between the fences was set for a long striding warm blood, not a compact quarter-horse cross. But Rusty's agility served them well. He adjusted his stride, met the first element perfectly, took one careful stride, and launched over the second fence with determination that brought the crowd to its feet. As they approached the final fence, an imposing 4-foot vertical that had claimed several victims earlier in the day, Savannah felt a moment of perfect clarity. This was what her grandfather had tried to teach her all those years ago. Riding wasn't about controlling the horse. It was about becoming partners in achieving a common goal. Rusty met the final fence at the perfect distance and soared over it with power and grace. As they landed and cantered through the finish flags, the arena erupted in applause that seemed to shake the very foundations of the building. "Clear round for Savannah Whitaker and Rusty," the announcer called, finally getting the horse's name right. As they slowed to a walk, Savannah leaned forward to wrap her arms around Rusty's neck, tears streaming down her cheeks. They had done it, not just survived, but succeeded in spectacular fashion. With 2 phases complete, the leaderboard showed Madison still in first, but Savannah had moved into second place, just 3 points behind. The impossible was becoming possible, and everyone, including Madison, was starting to believe that anything could happen in the final phase.
The cross-country course stretched across 40 acres of Westfield Academy's pristine countryside, a challenging track of natural obstacles that would test every aspect of horse and rider partnership. Unlike the controlled environment of the arena, Cross-country was riding in its most primitive form, galloping across varied terrain, jumping solid fences that didn't fall down if you hit them, racing against the clock while navigating potential hazards that could end a partnership's day in an instant. Savannah walked the course twice in the hour before her ride time, memorizing every fence, every approach, every potential trouble spot. The jumps were imposing, a log pile that had to be 4 feet high, a bank complex that required jumping up onto a mound and then immediately off the other side, a water complex with multiple elements, and a notorious fence called the coffin, a rail followed immediately by a ditch and then another rail, all set on a downhill slope that had claimed many victims over the years. "The time allowed is pretty tight," James observed as they completed their second walk of the course. "Madison's gonna go for broke. She'll take every short route, make every inside turn. She's not just trying to go clear anymore, she needs to make up time to maintain her lead." After 2 phases, the competition had narrowed to a 2-horse race. Madison maintained her lead by less than 3 points, but Savannah's unexpected competence in show jumping had completely changed the dynamics. For the first time in her academic career, Madison was feeling genuine pressure from a competitor she had initially dismissed as irrelevant. The cross-country start was positioned at the highest point of the course, giving riders a panoramic view of the challenges ahead while adding to the psychological pressure. As Savannah waited for her start time, she could hear the commentary from the finish line as earlier competitors completed their rounds, some successfully, others with costly time penalties or eliminations at the more technical fences. Brittany Ashworth had been eliminated at the water complex when her horse refused the final element 3 times. Another rider had accumulated 60 penalties for 2 refusals and time faults. The course was proving more challenging than expected, and the attrition rate was higher than anyone had anticipated. Madison's round had been typically flawless, fast, efficient, and technically perfect. She'd made up the time she needed and added to her lead, posting a score that would be difficult for anyone to match. As she rode back to the stable area, her smile was radiant with the confidence of someone who had just secured victory. 30 seconds to your start time, the official informed Savannah as she settled into Rusty's saddle for the final time that day. Her partner felt different beneath her, alert and energized in a way she'd never experienced before. The steady lesson horse had been replaced by an athlete ready to run. "This is it, boy," she whispered, leaning forward to pat his neck. "Whatever happens out there, we give it everything we've got." The countdown began. 10 seconds, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, have a good ride. They crossed the start flags at a controlled gallop, Rusty's stride eating up the ground with surprising efficiency. The first fence, a simple log, came up quickly, too quickly for Savannah's comfort, but Rusty met it perfectly and they were away, racing across the open field toward the second obstacle. This was riding like nothing she'd experienced before. The controlled precision of dressage and show jumping was replaced by raw speed and instinct. Rusty seemed to come alive beneath her, his quarter-horse breeding showing in his natural balance and agility as they navigated the varied terrain. The bank complex loomed ahead, a daunting obstacle that required jumping up onto a raised platform and then immediately off the other side. Savannah had walked this fence multiple times, but experiencing it at speed was entirely different. Rusty gathered himself and launched upward, landing on the bank with barely a pause before launching himself off the far side in one fluid motion that left the crowd gasping in amazement. "That's how you ride a bank!" someone shouted from the sidelines, and Savannah couldn't help but grin as they galloped on toward the water complex. Water jumps were notoriously difficult because they required horses to jump into an element they couldn't fully see or judge. Many horses would refuse, stop, or jump poorly into water, and this particular complex had already eliminated one rider and given several others trouble.
But Rusty approached the water with his ears pricked forward and his stride never faltering. He launched over the first element, a rail set just in front of the pond, landed with a mighty splash, cantered 2 strides through the water, and then powered up and over the final element to emerge on dry ground with what looked like suspiciously enthusiasm. The crowd was on its feet now, sensing that they were witnessing something special. The girl who had been mocked for her accent and dismissed for her background was riding the round of her life on a horse nobody believed in. The coffin fence approached, the most technical challenge on the course and the one that had worried Savannah the most during her walks. The downhill approach required perfect balance and timing, and the combination rail-ditch-rail had to be ridden with commitment and precision. Rusty never hesitated. He met the first rail at the perfect distance, landed, took 1 stride, jumped the ditch, landed again, took another stride, and sailed over the final element with power and confidence that suggested he'd been doing this kind of riding his entire life. As they galloped toward the final few fences, Savannah realized that something profound was happening. This wasn't just about winning or losing anymore. It was about the pure joy of partnership with a horse who had found his true calling. Rusty was flying over these fences with an enthusiasm that was infectious, his ears constantly pricked forward as if he couldn't wait to see what challenge came next. The final fence was a massive log pile set at the bottom of a hill, requiring careful balance and timing as they descended at speed. Rusty adjusted his stride naturally, met the fence perfectly, and cleared it with room to spare as they galloped through the finish flags to tumultuous applause. Clear round for Savannah Whitaker and Rusty, well within the time allowed. The official time was announced moments later, and the crowd erupted. Not only had they gone clear, but they had done it fast enough to move into first place overall. The girl from Texas had just taken the lead in the final phase of competition. As Savannah slowed Rusty to a walk and leaned forward to hug his neck, tears streaming down her face, she could see Madison in the distance, her perfect composure finally cracking as she realized that her assumed victory had just slipped away. The impossible had happened. The cowgirl was winning. The moment Savannah and Rusty crossed the finish line, the entire atmosphere at Westfield Academy shifted. The crowd that had gathered to witness what many expected to be an embarrassing defeat was now on its feet, cheering for an underdog story that had exceeded everyone's wildest expectations. Phones were everywhere, capturing every moment of what had already become one of the most shared equestrian videos in social media history. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer's voice boomed across the grounds, "we have a new leader. Savannah Whitaker and Rusty have taken first place with their cross-country performance." The scoreboard confirmed what seemed impossible just hours earlier. Savannah's combined score across all 3 phases had edged out Madison by less than 2 penalty points, a margin so narrow it seemed almost miraculous. More importantly, it represented something that transcended numbers, the triumph of partnership and authentic horsemanship over privilege and presumption. As Savannah dismounted and began to untack Rusty, she found herself surrounded by a crowd of well-wishers, reporters, and amazed spectators. The transformation in people's attitudes was remarkable. The same students who had mocked her accent days earlier were now clamoring for selfies and asking about her training methods. "Savannah! Savannah!" a reporter pushed through the crowd with her microphone extended. "How does it feel to have just pulled off one of the biggest upsets in scholastic equestrian history?" For a moment, Savannah was overwhelmed by the chaos surrounding them. But then she felt Rusty's warm breath on her shoulder and turned to look into his calm, intelligent eyes. In that moment, everything else fell away. The cameras, the noise, the pressure, and she remembered what this had really been about. "It feels like justice," she said simply, her voice carrying clearly over the crowd. "Not just for me, but for every horse and rider who's been dismissed because they didn't fit someone's narrow definition of what a champion should look like. This horse right here has been carrying beginner riders for years, treated like he was just another lesson horse, but he had the heart of a champion all along.
Sometimes you just need to give someone, or in this case, someone with 4 legs, a chance to show what they're really capable of. The crowd pressed closer, hanging on every word. The story of the scholarship student and the forgotten horse had captured something deeper than just a competition victory. It had become a symbol of potential overlooked and prejudice overcome. But not everyone was celebrating. Madison Covington Smith stood at the edge of the crowd, her pristine competition attire now seeming almost costume-like compared to Savannah's genuine, lived-in appearance. The confident smirk that had been her trademark for years was gone, replaced by something that looked dangerously close to panic. For Madison, this defeat represented more than just losing a competition. It challenged the very foundation of her identity, the belief that money and breeding and social status naturally translated into superiority in every area of life. To be beaten by someone she had dismissed as inferior was not just embarrassing, it was existentially threatening. "This isn't over," Madison said quietly to Brittany, her voice carrying an edge that her closest friends recognized as dangerous. "There has to be something wrong with this. Scores that close don't just happen." But even as she spoke, Madison knew she was grasping at straws. She had watched Savannah's rides, had seen the genuine partnership and skill on display. This hadn't been a fluke or a mistake. It had been a comprehensive defeat by a better rider on the day. James McCarthy made his way through the crowd to where Savannah was still fussing over Rusty, making sure her partner was comfortable and properly cared for before turning attention to the victory celebration. "I've been teaching for 30 years, and I've never seen anything quite like that. The way you two rode today, that was special, Savannah. Really special." "Couldn't have done it without him," Savannah replied, giving Rusty one final pat before turning to face the celebration that was building around them. "Or without you believing in us when nobody else would." The formal awards ceremony took place an hour later in the main arena, with the entire Academy community in attendance, along with the growing crowd of spectators who had been drawn by social media coverage. As Savannah stood on the top step of the podium, the gold medal heavy around her neck, she looked out over an audience that had been completely transformed. Where once there had been mockery and dismissal, now there was respect and admiration. Students who had laughed at her accent days earlier were now cheering her name. Faculty who had treated her as a charity case were acknowledging her as a serious competitor. But perhaps most importantly, there was a small group of younger students, scholarship kids and outsiders who had previously felt invisible, looking at her with something that hadn't been there before: hope. "Before I conclude today's ceremonies," the announcer's voice boomed across the grounds, "I want to acknowledge that what we witnessed today represents the very best of our educational mission. Miss Whitaker has demonstrated that excellence comes in many forms, and that the measure of a person or a partnership cannot be determined by superficial factors." As the crowd erupted in final applause and the ceremony concluded, Savannah found herself thinking about her grandfather's words from that phone call days earlier. "It ain't the size of the horse in the fight, it's the size of the fight in the horse." Today, she and Rusty had shown everyone exactly what that meant. The girl with the country accent had been laughed at when she first walked through Westfield Academy's marble hallways. But when the dust settled and the scores were tallied, she had done something that would be remembered long after the ribbons faded and the trophies gathered dust. She had proven that authentic horsemanship, the kind built on partnership, respect, and genuine skill rather than money and privilege, could triumph over any obstacle. And she had left them all absolutely speechless.
6 months later, the reverberations of that October day at Westfield Academy were still being felt across the equestrian world and far beyond. What had started as a local school competition had become a viral phenomenon that transcended sports, inspiring millions of people who had ever felt underestimated or overlooked. Savannah sat in the same dormitory room where she had spent that anxious night before the competition, but everything had changed. The simple space was now decorated with ribbons from subsequent competitions, scholarship offers from prestigious universities, and letters from young riders around the world who had been inspired by her story.
The hashtag #CowgirlRising hashtag had generated over 50 million interactions across social media platforms, spotting countless reaction videos, think pieces about class and opportunity in equestrian sports, and even a documentary deal with a major streaming service. But perhaps most meaningfully, it had started conversations about inclusivity and authenticity in circles that had previously been resistant to change. Rusty, meanwhile, had become something of a celebrity himself. The lesson horse that became a champion had his own social media accounts, managed by devoted students who documented his daily life with the kind of attention usually reserved for human influencers. More importantly, his story had led to a fundamental change in how Westfield Academy evaluated and utilized their school horses, many of whom, it turned out, had hidden talents that had been overlooked for years. "You ready for this?" Jessica asked from across the room, where she was adjusting her own competition attire. Savannah's former roommate had become her closest friend at the academy, their bond forged in the aftermath of that transformative competition day. Today was the anniversary competition, a special event that Westfield Academy had decided to make an annual tradition, open to riders from all backgrounds and designed to celebrate the values that Savannah and Rusty had embodied. The entry requirements emphasized partnership and horsemanship over pedigree and privilege, and the competition had drawn entries from across the country. "As ready as I'll ever be," Savannah replied, though her focus was less on winning another ribbon than on something far more significant happening at the academy that day. The Savannah Whitaker Scholarship Fund, established with donations that had poured in from supporters around the world, was awarding its first full scholarships to 5 students from working-class backgrounds who had demonstrated exceptional horsemanship skills. These weren't token gestures or publicity stunts, but genuine opportunities for talented riders who might not have had a chance to develop their abilities at an elite institution. Among the scholarship recipients was Maria Santos, a 16-year-old from inner-city Detroit who had learned to ride at a therapeutic riding center and demonstrated natural talent that reminded many observers of a young Savannah. Like Savannah, Maria had faced skepticism about whether she belonged in elite equestrian circles. Unlike Savannah, she would have support and advocacy from her first day at the academy. "The media's calling it the Rusty effect," James McCarthy observed as he joined Savannah in the stable, where she was tacking up her partner for their exhibition ride. The impact extended far beyond Westfield Academy. Other prestigious equestrian schools had begun reevaluating their scholarship programs and admission policies. The United States Equestrian Federation had announced new initiatives to promote diversity and inclusion in the sport. Even some of the most exclusive horse shows had begun offering classes specifically designed to showcase partnership and horsemanship rather than just expensive horses and professional training. But perhaps most meaningfully, it had started conversations about inclusivity and authenticity in circles that had previously been resistant to change. "You know what the best part is?" Savannah asked as she adjusted Rusty's bridle, the familiar routine as comforting as ever. "None of this happened because I set out to make a statement or prove a point. It happened because I just wanted to ride my horse to the best of my ability." As they walked toward the arena, Savannah could see the crowd gathering for the day's events. Unlike the skeptical audience of 6 months ago, this crowd was genuinely diverse. Families of all backgrounds, young riders wearing everything from custom show coats to borrowed jackets from local tack shops, professionals and amateurs united by their love of horses rather than divided by their bank accounts. Madison Covington Smith was there too, though her presence represented a different kind of transformation. The defeat that day had initially been devastating for her, but it had ultimately led to some honest self-reflection about her attitudes and assumptions. She was now working as a volunteer instructor in the Academy's new outreach program, teaching riding skills to underprivileged children from nearby communities. The experience had humbled her in ways that winning never could, teaching her that true leadership meant lifting others up rather than putting them down. "Savannah," Madison approached as they prepared for the exhibition ride, her voice carrying none of its old arrogance. "I wanted to thank you." "Thank me?" Savannah paused, genuinely surprised. "For showing me what real horsemanship looks like.
I thought I was a good rider because I won ribbons, but I was just someone who could afford good horses and professional training. You taught me the difference between riding and partnership." Madison's voice was steady, but Savannah could see the sincerity in her eyes. "I'm a better person because of what you accomplished that day." The conversation was interrupted by the sound of hooves on pavement as the new scholarship students led their assigned horses toward the arena for their own exhibition. Maria Santos was riding Thunder, an off-track thoroughbred who had been written off as too hot for amateur riders. But under Maria's calm and confident handling, the horse moved with relaxed purpose, their partnership already beginning to bloom. "That could be the next champion right there," Savannah observed, watching Maria work with Thunder. "She's got something special." "She reminds me of another rider I know," James said with a smile. "Someone who showed up here with more heart than pedigree and changed everything." As the exhibition began, Savannah and Rusty demonstrated the partnership that had captivated the world 6 months earlier. But this wasn't about winning or proving anything anymore. It was about celebrating the bond between horse and rider, the democracy of the saddle, where skill and heart mattered more than social status or financial resources. Their ride was flawless, but more than that, it was joyful. Rusty moved with the confidence of a horse who knew he was valued, who understood his role as more than just a lesson horse or a stepping stone to something better. He had become a symbol of potential realized, of worth recognized, of partnership triumphant. As they completed their final circuit of the arena and came to a halt in front of the enthusiastic crowd, Savannah felt a profound sense of completion. Not because her story was over, but because it had grown beyond her individual journey to become something larger, a movement that would continue long after she and Rusty had moved on to their next chapter. The scholarship students were already making their mark, bringing fresh perspectives and genuine passion to a sport that had sometimes forgotten its roots in the partnership between human and horse. The academy itself was changing, becoming more inclusive and more focused on authentic horsemanship rather than superficial markers of status or financial resources. But perhaps most importantly, young riders around the world were learning that they didn't need the perfect horse or unlimited resources to achieve their dreams. They just needed skill, determination, and the courage to stay in the saddle when others counted them out. As Savannah dismounted and loosened Rusty's girth, she thought about all the messages she'd received from young riders who had been inspired to pursue their equestrian dreams despite financial or social obstacles. Girls from rural communities who had started competing with borrowed equipment and rescued horses. Boys from urban areas who had discovered riding through therapeutic programs and found their calling. Riders from every background imaginable who had learned that excellence wasn't about where you came from, but about where you were willing to go. "You did good today, old man," she whispered to Rusty as she led him back to the stable, the crowd's applause still echoing behind them. The late afternoon sun slanted through the stable windows, casting golden light on the scene that had become so familiar, Savannah caring for her horse with the same attention and love she'd shown from their first day together. But now there were other riders there too, scholarship students and traditional students working side by side, united by their shared love of horses and riding. The country accent girl had walked into Westfield Academy 6 months ago as an outsider, someone to be mocked and dismissed. She was leaving as a champion, but more than that, she was leaving as someone who had changed the very definition of what it meant to belong in the elite equestrian world. Her accent was the same, her background hadn't changed, her values remained rooted in the lessons her grandfather had taught her on that dusty Texas ranch. But she had proven that authenticity and skill could triumph over prejudice and privilege, that true excellence came from partnership rather than pedigree. And when the history of equestrian sport was written, the day that Savannah Whitaker and Rusty left them all speechless would be remembered as the moment everything changed, when the cowgirl proved that the best riders aren't always the ones with the fanciest equipment or the most expensive horses, but the ones with the biggest hearts and the strongest partnerships. In the end, that's what real horsemanship has always been about. Not the money you can spend, but the trust you can build. Not the ribbons you can buy, but the respect you can earn. Not the accent you speak with, but the language you share with your horse. And sometimes, just sometimes, the cowgirl wins. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up.
Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.